and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game.
Right.
Let's meet the panel.
I'm Larry.
Kayla.
I'm Ari.
And I'm Josh. And today we're going to be going over a poem from Russian poet Osip Mandelstam. And that is Black Sun. Mandelstam lived during the transition of Russia into the Soviet Union, and he eventually was sent to the gulags after he wrote and released a poem that spoke negatively of Stalin. And the gulags had a great detrimental effect on him. But Black Sun was written in 1916, so it was earlier than his demise in the 30s. And the discussion starter I have is that...
He's also Jewish, I forgot I was mentioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was raised Jewish. His religion, though, he was a bit...
It was not a straight...
He wasn't devout the way that Chaim Potok was.
Yeah, no.
But he was more questioning, kind of like a Saul Bellow.
Kind of like a Reformed Jew, in a way, rather than conservative.
I don't know if that would be his denomination, his class, but because he was raised Jewish.
Mm.
But the discussion starter I have is that Mandelstam was deemed as an acmeist, which has been defined as a movement with, and I quote, a desire for poems free of any symbolist nonsense about contact with other worlds, and that images were to be concrete and sharply realized, and the statement of poems rigorously logical. This same introduction stated that Mandelstam frequently went against these rules in some way or another. Does he demonstrate this in Black Sun?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, well, sorry, let me rephrase that. Yes, he is against what you just said. He's not the same as what you just said.
It doesn't seem that way, given that many of his poems, if you're reading it the way that you would read a Seamus Heaney poem, you're doing it wrong.
I researched this poem probably more heavy than any other Literary Gladiators thing I've ever done, and I can tell you that it seems that there are 2 or 3 things that caused this poem to be written, Black Sun, to represent not only the Black Sun itself, but to represent the poem. I'll get into that in a little bit.
You mean the symbol of the Black Sun?
The symbolism of it, and also the symbolism of the entire poem, why he wrote the poem, and where it came from.
It's interesting the different arguments that can be made about Black Suns, and the Black Sun itself. The particular symbol was an inspiration decades later, or about 25 years later, for the swastika in its occult image. Granted, the swastika was not deemed the way that it is deemed now, but because of the nature of Nazism, it forever has that scar against it.
And so does the Black Sun.
And, yeah, hence the Black Sun as well. But this particular Black Sun, there's also the argument about it being the cycle of life. Granted...
There's the argument of it being Black Sun means night. Now, here's an interesting thing. It's not in this particular poem by this guy, but there have been other poems that very similar to these that both by this guy and other guys that use Black Sun imagery. And I remember one of the translations had said, the fall of the Black Sun. The word for fall and the word for attack in Russian are very similar.
Mm.
So they could be saying the attack of the Black Sun.
Mm-hmm.
I read that online.
Mm. Mm-hmm. That definitely does throw a curveball.
Mm.
But I know that I was referring to this particular New York Review. The name of the publisher. It's New York Review Books, and Clarence Brown and W.S. Merwin. I refer to this as my translation. Ari, before the show, showed me something that really gelled in and used words that really zeroed in on the Judaism that influences the poem. Using
And it's also a lot more rhythmic than the version in this. I'll probably put a link in the description. So
because
if you
I
guys
also
want to check it out.
there was also that I definitely felt that there were biblical overtones or something that is reminiscent of such. It did the piece Osip Mandelstam and the Modernist Creation of Tradition said that it did not have to do with the Christian thought of the apocalypse.
And that would be correct,
which,
according to what I researched.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, the images that he uses. Probably the one that sticks out the most is the very last stanza.
I woke in a glittering cradle lit by the black sun.
Yeah, I woke
that's the original.
Yeah, which the
cradle
cradle makes me think about Jesus' birth.
But under a black sun, that's like I think he's talking about like being affected as a child by something dark.
That is definitely a legitimate case. Just the image itself, but granted, Jesus also had his mother well and present. In this case, the mother was taken away.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the mother also is... It's not necessarily a concrete element.
So, if based off my research, I found something that could be described as the black sun. And something that could describe the entire poem in its entirety. I figured I'd go over that. So I've read on multiple sites that these two events, well, one of them's an event, the other is a plot of a play, and that these combined to inspire Mandelstam for making this poem. The Black Sun is apparently supposed to represent the death of Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Basically, Pushkin was, long story short, in 1837, 1837, he was involved in a duel, and he was fatally stabbed, and he died. But because he was such a famous poet, they did not want to just put him into a coffin and just put him anywhere. And they made the funeral very secret, and it's actually called the Night Burial of Pushkin. It's a very famous historical event in Russia.
Pushkin was very much like Mandelstam, and both of them were outspoken rebels against the Russian rule. Pushkin was years before the Soviet era, though. Mandelstam was during the
Mandelstam, I believe, was born in the 1880s.
1891. He died in 1938. It was 1891.
So that a lot of people speculate that the Black Sun is in fact the death of Alexander Pushkin and the whole ceremony down at St. Petersburg. And actually, I have a quick poem I want to read by a Russian poet named Lermontov. It's only the first stanza. It is longer, but it's called Death of the Poet. It's called, "The poet's dead, a slave to honor. He fell by rumor slandered, lead in his breast and thirsting for revenge, hanging his proud head. The poet's soul could not endure petty insults, disgrace. Against society he rose, alone as always, and was slain. Slain, what use is weeping now? The futile chorus of empty praise. Excuses mumbled full of pathos. Fate has pronounced its sentence. Was it not you who spitefully rebuffed his free, courageous gift, and for your own amusement fanned the nearly dying flame?" That kind of hits the last line there. "Well, now enjoy yourselves. He couldn't endure the final torture. Quenched is the marvelous light of genius. Withered is the triumphal wreath."
That's quite something.
It was a very, very big deal in Russia.
And I think that it was very relevant in a place like Russia because there was always some kind of methodology that went against what we deem as our following the First Amendment. That is almost non-existent.
Yeah, like you're not going to see someone duel someone because the person was possibly having an affair with your wife.
Yeah.
I mean, usually it's not that decent.
There were duels, but it was different. with
Yeah,
Hamilton.
you had to
was
like
political.
challenge. The thing with duels is that they don't really have them anymore. Whenever you had a duel, usually you'd have to let the other person know and challenge the other person to a duel, and they could either accept or decline. In this case, the Pushkin initially declined the duel sent by the other guy, or maybe I think he sent it, and then there's a declination, and then later it got so bad with the affair with that other guy and his wife that he challenged the duel. The other got accepted, and then the rest is history.
Mm-hmm.
But duels no longer happen because people are not as decent as they used to be back in the 1800s. So, I wanted to go into another thing, another source I found that it seems to be about the plot, possibly, of this play.
You have links to these sources?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can put links in. So I have also some interesting information about not what the Black Sun represents, but what the entire poem could represent. And in association, I'm going to go back to right around the 1600s. There was a play written by the famous Greek tragic playwright guy. Euphrates, something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. And he wrote a
That
play.
wasn't that before Common Era?
No, this guy was in the 1600s. Anyway, going back in time to a play that was called Hippolytus. And Hippolytus, to make a long story short,
Euripides.
You what?
Euripides?
Yeah, Euripides. That's it. Yeah. Hippolytus is basically about I'm just reading here. It's about the wife named Phaedra. Pardon me if I get any of these names wrong. I do not speak Greek, and I do not usually go near Greek plays because of how complicated they are. But Phaedra loves Hippolytus, but then Hippolytus says that he doesn't love Phaedra back, and basically because of that, Phaedra kills herself and makes it look like Hippolytus raped her. And Theseus, who's the father, gets that news that she was raped and basically curses Hippolytus with one of Poseidon's curses. And basically, apparently, this play that was done by Euripides is the basis for what this Black Sun poem is about.
Quite something to think about. Because there's so much to think about with this particular poem that's a challenge to find online anyhow. Granted, you must have found your version. Was it complicated to look it
To
up?
find all this took me about an hour and a half. So it took a while.
Yeah, there's some of them. It's
Because I was initially intrigued by the lyrics, and I just started looking stuff up, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting, this is interesting.
That's what matters. Especially, it's very interesting that a poem can do that, and it's interesting what this man, this person put together.
What do you guys think this poem was trying to portray?
Larry?
Something sinister to me. It's like something evil is happening. His mother's being burned. There's no sanctity to it. It's like, it's like even though it's happening in the temple, it's like it's happening, and but there's no rabbi or priest or anybody to look at it religiously, or even to bury the body because they're burning it. It's like I'm not exactly sure what it's getting at. I'm not sure what the history was going on, culturally what was happening in Russia at that time.
Definitely makes you feel hopeless and abandoned.
I can tell you that usually when there's a burning in a Jewish temple or in any kind of situation, if there's no rabbi and there's no blessing, if it says something like that, it's usually pointing towards suicide. Because you can't really bury people in Jewish tradition. You can't really bury people in the same Jewish ceremonies are kind of like a special haven, a special place. You can't bury people who committed suicide in those areas.
Yeah, it's with many religions.
If you think about it, it's kind of similar to this part here about. So first of all, the new version, the one you have, says somewhere outside grace, with no priests to lead them, and the other version says. The Jews in the temples burning, sorry, wrong line. Without rabbi, without blessing, over her ashes there, the Jews in the temples burning chanted the prayer. So especially your version is telling me that the person who is the mother who's described in this song is committed suicide, just like Phaedra did in the play.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I buy that. So maybe that's what it's about: is his mother killing herself.
It's possible.
That could very much be another image. I'd have to look up. I'd have to look up that angle of his.
And like
background.
I said, I could put. I'll put links. Tell Josh the links to the sources, all the information I found, so you guys can read it as well. And if you guys in the comments have any like anything that we've said about this poem that you think could be a little bit edited, if I said something that wasn't necessarily correct, just put it in the comments and I'll respond to you.
What were your thoughts, Kaila?
I didn't do like all the research you did on it or anything. I didn't know like when it had been written really. I had kind of taken it more as like almost like a first person account of the Holocaust, I guess, talking about the burning and the ashes without the rabbi
It
And
had
Black
very.
and
It had
and the black sun.
It had Nazi and Holocaust related images, but it was written in 1916.
Yes,
Right.
it was written about 30 years before the Holocaust.
Which I
20 years, excuse me, 20 years before the Holocaust.
Which I do. I'm very similar to Kaila. I seem to approach the works acoustically, if you know what I mean.
From what you heard rather than what you know or what you saw.
Which
I
you
usually
see
don't
versus-
use. Yeah, I usually don't use secondary sources.
No, I usually don't either, and I don't like it when I feel like I have to. But this time I felt like I had to, so I just looked up what the Black Sun was, because I didn't know that much.
I had to do the same thing because I wanted to make sure I was approaching it properly. And even the Black Sun, even research on the Black Sun can be misleading too.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that the Black Sun is supposed to be nighttime. I've heard people say that the Black Sun is supposed to be like some sort of darkness, and like I said, I've heard even the more specific ones. I've heard that the Black Sun, it could represent the death of a certain poet. So I mean, it just really depends where you look at your stuff, what you believe it is. That's really what it is with poetry. It's what I mean, someone may have a initial view of it, but it's really what your view is that is most important to yourself.
Well, certainly.
Yeah.
So, does anybody have any final thoughts?
This is probably the most in-depth I've ever gotten into with any poem, and probably ever, not even just literary gladiators.
That's a good thing.
I found the version that Josh had in the book that he has. I found it interesting, but I felt like I felt like it wasn't complete. It was incomplete because it felt like it was very choppy in the words. And then I just happened to find this other translated version online, which rhymes, and it's a lot more smoother and easier to understand.
And clearer. Yeah, I think it's clearer to a point.
Yeah, it's a whole different poem once you read that second version.
Yeah.
Did the word Israelite stick out to you when you were reading it the first time?
So, okay. So, as Kaila just said, it's a very different poem, both of these versions. It says, the voices of Israelites rang out over my mother. And then here it says, over this mother, Israel's voice was sung. Israel and Israelites are not the same thing. Like, if someone says that Israel's voice, that could mean any of the 12 tribes, if we're talking this history here.
It could even mean Abraham himself, right?
If I don't think it would have gone that far back, but it could. It could. I think this is more like talking about like when they've already occupied Israel, because when Abraham was there, Israel had not been like really founded.
But he was named Israel.
That was Jacob. Jacob.
Oh,
was
that's
Israel.
right.
It could be Jacob. It could be Jacob. But I think what it is it's talking about like not just Israel, but all the 12 tribes that were in the area of Israel. By saying Israelites, that's only like one small group. So.
and a group of people versus as a whole.
So to answer your question, it stuck out to me, but I mean, like, I thought what stuck out to me more was the like the Jerusalem part.
Okay.
That went into Jerusalem because that's a specific place.
That's what encouraged you to get into further research.
It's also in the it's in the first verse too.
Yeah, that definitely is bound to grab your attention.
And because the other in the translated version, the other two times in your version it says Israelites, it says Jews, so, which are also two different things.
That is quite that is quite a way to translate. Alrighty then. If you're interested in looking into Osip Mandelstam and his poetry, here is the selected poems of Osip Mandelstam, translated by Clarence Brown and W.S. Merwin. And it includes everything from his early days, starting in 1910 and going until the 1930s when he was imprisoned to being an enemy of the people.
And also, I will be putting links in the description of all the sources I used, including the Hippolytus source, the Pushkin burial source, the translated version of this poem that I found online, and also I will try and find the source for Clarence Brown's entire book on Mandelstam. Not. I don't think it's this one. I think it's
the modernist creation of tradition.
I think it's that.
I'll leave a link down below to that, just because I made mention to that. And before we sign off, I want to congratulate Kaila on her marriage. She just came back from her honeymoon.
Thank you.
And we hope to have you on much more as Kaila Flickinger.
Thank you.
Alrighty, and maybe your husband every now and then.
I'm sure he'll be on too.
We'll just have to find something he likes. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now,
keep reading. Yay. Hello.
Hello.
Everybody.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators.
You're my biggest fan, Josh!
Excuse me for a moment.
I gotta pay. Can I pause?
Too late.
Is it rolling?
I'm afraid so. We caught the whole thing. Outtake!
The show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game.
I won't put a bunny in my pants.
Okay, we need to